So I'm gonna get going right on time because this is a very long chapter. But I really like the full reading of the text before we begin, because that gives us the context of where we're gonna go. So James, we'll read, it's long, well, it may take four or 5 minutes to read, but let's read through the chapter, okay? And then we'll talk about it. So I think it's a good use of our time to read as much of or all of the text that we can. So Rod will pray for us, and then we're gonna read through, long chapter, we're gonna read all the way through Acts 27, and then we'll engage in conversation.
Father, it's a blessing to be here with you in this space on a beautiful day. Lead us as we contemplate Acts 27, that we will learn something from your mind and your spirit and your will that will help us. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. All right, long chapter, here we go, we're gonna do it. It might take 5 minutes to read, but we're gonna do it.
When the time came, we set sail for Italy. Paul and several other prisoners were placed in the custody of a Roman officer named Julius, a captain of the imperial regiment. Aristarchus, a Macedonian from Thessalonica, was with us also. We left on a ship whose home port was Aradmitium on the northwest coast of the province of Asia. It was scheduled to make several stops at ports along the coast of the province. The next day, we docked at Sidon. Julius was very kind to Paul and let him go ashore with friends so they could provide for his needs. Putting out to sea from there, we encountered strong headwinds that made it difficult to keep the ship on course. So we sailed north of Cyprus between the island and the mainland. Keeping to the open sea, we passed along the coast of Sicilia and Pamphylia, landing at Myra in the province of Lycia. There, the commanding officer found an Egyptian ship from Alexandria that was bound for Italy, and he put us on board. We had several days of slow sailing. After great difficulty, we finally neared Cnidus, but the wind was against us, so we sailed across to Crete and along the sheltered coast of the island, past the Cape of Salome. We struggled along the coast with great difficulty and finally arrived at Fair Havens, near the town of Lasea. We had lost a lot of time. The weather was being dangerous for sea travel because it was so late in the fall, and Paul spoke to the ship's officers about it. Men, he said, I believe there's trouble ahead if we go on. Shipwreck, loss of cargo, and danger of loss of lives as well. But the officer in charge of the prisoners listened more to the ship's captain and owner than to Paul. And since Fairhaven was an exposed harbor, a poor place to spend the winter, most of the crew wanted to go on to Phoenix, further up the coast of Crete, and spend the winter there. Phoenix was a good harbor, not only with only southwest and northwest exposure. When a light wind began blowing from the south, the sailors thought they could make it. So they pulled up anchor and sailed close to the shore of Crete. But when the weather changed abruptly, a wind of typhoon strength called a nor'easter burst across the island and blew us out to sea. The sailors couldn't turn the ship into the wind, so they gave up and let it run before the gale. We sailed along the sheltered side of a small island named Kuata, where with great difficulty we hoisted aboard a lifeboat being towed behind us. Then the sailors found ropes around the hull of the ship to strengthen it. They were afraid of being driven across the sandbars off Syrtis of the African coast, so they lowered a sea anchor to slow the ship and were driven before the wind began throwing cargo overboard. The following day, they even took some of the ship's gear and threw it overboard. The terrible storm raged for many days, blotting out the sun and the stars, until last all hope was gone. No one had eaten for a long time. Finally, Paul called the crew together and said, Men, you should have listened to me in the first place and not left Crete. You would have avoided all the damage and loss, but take courage. None of you will lose your lives, even though the ship will go down. For last night, an angel of God to whom I belong and whom I serve stood beside me. And he said, don't be afraid, Paul, for you will surely stand trial before Caesar. What's more, God in his goodness has granted safety to everyone sailing with you. So take courage, for I believe God, it will be just as he said, but we'll be shipwrecked on an island. About midnight on the 14th night of the storm, as we were being driven across the Sea of Adria, the sailors sensed land was near. They dropped their weight line and found that the water was 120 feet deep. A little later, they measured again and found it was only 90 feet deep. At this rate, they were afraid they would soon be driven across the rocks along the shore. So they threw out 4 anchors from the back of the ship and prayed for daylight. Then the sailors tried to abandon ship. They lowered the lifeboats as though they were going to put out anchors from the front of the ship. But Paul said to the commanding officers and soldiers, you all will die unless the sailors stay on board. So the soldiers cut the ropes to the lifeboats and let them drift away. Just as day was dawning, Paul urged everyone to eat. You have been so worried that you haven't touched your food for 2 weeks, he said. Please eat something for your own good, for not a hair on your heads will perish. Then he took some bread, gave thanks to God before them all, and broke off a piece and ate it. Then everyone was encouraged and began to eat. All 276 of us who were on board. After eating, the crew lightened the ship further by throwing cargo of wheat overboard. When morning dawned, they didn't recognize the coastline, but they saw a bay with a beach and wondered if they could get to shore by running the ship aground. So they cut off the anchors and left them in the sea. Then they lowered the rudders, raised the foresail, and headed towards shore. But they hit a shoal and ran the ship aground too soon. Before the bar, the ship stuck fast, while the stern was repeatedly smashed by the force waves and began to break apart. The soldiers wanted to kill the prisoners to make sure they didn't swim ashore and escape. But the commanding officer wanted to spare Paul, so they didn't let them carry out the plan. Then he ordered all who could swim over to jump overboard first and make it to land. The others held onto planks or debris from the broken ship, so everyone escaped safely to shore.
Well done. Excellent. That was Herculean work right there. Okay, so this is a story about boats. And I'll remind you, it's not 1, but 2. Did you notice? There's 2 boats in this journey, 2 ships. And so just to get our juices going a little bit, watercraft shows up in the scriptures in several places, by the way. So I sense that you need a little mental exercise to get going this morning. So let's name a few of the watercraft stories that have significance in scripture.
Noah.
Okay, yeah, right. So Noah and the ark. Yes.
Moses, the little.
Yeah, Moses and the smallest watercraft and the basket.
We're going there. How about Jonah?
Nope, Jonah and I know it's not a whale. We're gonna argue. It was a fish, not a whale. What else?
Jesus.
Yeah, so we have Jesus and the storm. We should have a few in this category.
Jesus preaching.
Fishing, walking on water.
Yeah, so there's the fishing with Jesus. There's the H2O. See, I said it out loud and then did this. There's the water walking.
Calling the apostles to be fishers of men.
Yeah, so there's the calling story. So those are all Jesus.
Parting in the Red Sea. That's
No boats.
Not giving you that one. But But you certainly have, right? I mean, you certainly have several significant stories, including in the life of Jesus, where that feature of history is talked about. It's an important piece. And here we have two ships in the story, and one scholar, Thomas Walker, a scholar of the book of Acts, writes, and you'll note up here, there is no such detailed record of the working of an ancient ship in the whole of classical literature. So this description that we just read, that James just gave voice to, this is one of the most, if not the most detailed sort of description of the workings of a ship that we might have. And this gives some evidence that's compelling that Luke is in fact, when you look at the way history's got written in the ancient world, Luke is in fact not just reporting on something he's heard, but Luke is
Participating.
yeah, he's on the boat. So this is an eyewitness account, we think, right? Luke is here. Luke is one of Paul's companions. Luke is doing what a journalist does and writing descriptions of this experience. Okay, so one, when we read this story, we say, okay, ships show up in the Gospels, in the biblical story. They play a role in some really kind of prominent ways. And then also we have here a description that's really fascinating because you learn all these things about what's going on with weather, the mechanics of a ship, the crew of the ship, sort of the authority structures on a boat, kind of interesting. And you notice, what was the function of these ships?
Commerce.
Okay, so commerce, right? There's grain. This is the big Roman grain operation of feeding the world.
Moving prisoners.
Commerce, moving prisoners. So we think that these, the who was on these ships, one, you have, the commercial interests, which you mentioned. And then here you have prisoners. Why on earth are these prisoners going to Rome? Stand trial. Paul's appeal to Caesar for sure.
Mhm.
Possible that some are in his category, but also quite likely we think that they're getting shipped to Rome because what are criminals that are condemned to die getting shipped to Rome for?
Colosseum.
That's right. Yeah. So the historical suspicion here is that these are prisoners condemned to die, but we're not just taking care of them. We need them for sport, right? So that they are headed to a really horrific piece of Rome and to their own fate, but also to be victims of pretty awful entertainment, right? So imagine that, right? This is what's going on here. And so you see this combination of ships that are used for commercial purposes. The government is using these ships, for transportation purposes, more broadly. So if you can grab a ship, you can find a way, like Leonardo DiCaprio in the Titanic movie, you find a way onto the ship, right? So this is what's, no one even flinched at that. Are we awake this morning? That was, yeah. I'm trying to mix some popular culture into the sound, so.
A 3-hour tour.
Yes. Okay, so purpose of the ship, context of the ship. But what's most intriguing, and this is where I want to ask you some questions, is we find that Paul plays a significant role here, even though he's about at the bottom of the, if you will, the totem pole of, he's in chains, but he ends up playing a significant role here. So let's talk about that. What is Paul up to? This is your opening question. What role does he play in the events of these travels?
Trying to help them divert disaster.
Okay,
Taking a leadership role and saying, well, someone's got to say, that this is not a good idea.
yeah. So Deanne has actually used some language that was used in one of the commentators I read, which is he really takes a leadership role. He becomes, of the 276 passengers, which is another fascinating number, right? It's not one of these 40 days, 40 nights. This is a very specific number, 276. So that gives credence again to Luke's sort of, this is a very specific number. Paul becomes the first of those 276. Even though in terms of the rank and order of the captain of the ship and the crew and the soldiers that are present and everything, he's sort of at the bottom with the exception of maybe his two companions, which would be viewed as probably his servants or his slaves in a Roman context. Here, Dan's right? A leadership role. So what happens with his leadership role? How does he manifest leadership?
Says this is a bad idea to go on.
Okay, so what a bad idea in what way? I know I'm asking simple questions, but I wanna tease out the story here. In what way is it a bad idea?
It's stormy season, hurricane
Okay.
season.
So Paul's playing meteorologist, right? Paul's making an assessment about the weather. How does Paul know about the weather?
Been on these journeys before, he's educated.
He clearly is speaking from some authority, Richie. I mean, right? In fact, you see over the corner, I put estimates prior to this journey of about 3,500 miles of watercraft travel. So this is a pro. Yes, Walter.
Well, in pretty much every other context we've talked about him, we've always described how learned he is and how much schooling he's had.
Yeah,
How, I don't know, how liberal arts tradition was their schooling back then? Might have he learned some things about this that perhaps even the tradespeople running the ship might not know?
Yeah.
Like, is that possible? There weren't as many things to learn back then. So.
if you're a frequent flyer in airplanes, you start to learn a lot about exactly what's happening on an airplane, right? Paul, Walter, I mean, I don't know whether there's formal education, but clearly logging 3,500 miles in this business, he understood how the luggage went on. He understand the rules of the and he had seen weather before. Yes.
The centurion we've skipped because he was really the charge. He
Yeah.
had the ability, but he saw something in this prisoner.
Yeah.
So he treated him kindly
Yeah.
and he listened. So there was something about the gravitas of this man. This wasn't a common bait for the lions in the
Yes.
Colosseum. This was somebody else.
Yeah, interesting. Good observation. And the centurion was a good observer. What else? So there's a warning, there's some wisdom in learning here. What else do you notice in the leadership?
He had a dream.
Okay, so what does that tell us?
There's a spiritual aspect to this. This was not just humans dealing with each other, but there was a God interest in this ship.
Yeah, so I think I shared this with you too. A term I did not know until a few years ago, theosomnia. Which is rich in the scriptures, right? That things happen at night in our dreams. I have a great book on this, by the way, that I read, which is just all about how God engages us in sleep and dreams and things. We sort of don't know what to do with that, but if you read the book that I read, you're fairly convinced that God works with us in that state in interesting ways. And that certainly is what's happening here. Okay. What else?
He does play a little bit of I told you so.
Yeah, he has to get that in. I told you so. Is that just his personality showing up, probably?
Yeah.
Yeah, there's definitely, you need to listen to me. So was that impulsive or strategic? I don't know, but it was he certainly lays it out there. What else?
He's an encourager.
Yeah, so the cheat sheet is up here, class, a little bit. You see some really interesting things that he's doing with this leadership, right? So first of all, in verses 20, kind of in the section of verses 21 to 26, he says keep courage. So so the speech he's making here initially is, yeah, listen to me next time, I told you so, but keep courage. So what is this language of keep courage coming from? How can he afford to say this? What would be some of the reasons that he could say it's gonna be okay?
Dreamed about an angel.
Okay, so there's a spiritual or a revelatory component, dream. What else?
Is that his nature? I mean, he's been doing
Okay.
this all
Yeah.
through his journeys.
Yeah.
He preaches courage.
Is this a quality that we should all develop in life? That in the middle of a storm, there's a calming influence that we might have? Or a disposition that maybe we can move through this? I had a child early Thursday morning. When I say early, I mean midnight, 12:01, that decided to run into something in the house accidentally in the dark. And we found ourselves in the emergency room for a couple of hours getting this thing fixed and so forth. And I was essentially trying to use the language in the room that all will be well. Now it's easy for me to say because I wasn't the one bleeding sitting at the table. All will be well. Stay the course. They know what they're doing here. Yes, the numbing agent will in fact work. You know, but what was I doing? I was trying to provide some context that I tried to take on the nature, right? We will see this through. Everything will be well. So spiritual revelation, nature, Lois.
I think it's interesting as he says, don't be afraid. That often happens when an angel shows up.
Yeah. But in this instance, it has the opposite effect. Yeah, interesting. That wasn't the reaction of Mary. But here it has a calming effect. And yeah, good.
And kind of already being said, but both of those up there lend to trust that he knows what he's doing for spiritual reasons and just experience.
Yeah. I think you have touched on something, the second experience. I'm having spelling issues today. Yeah, I'm well qualified to lead an academic organization. Spelling prowess here. I think this is a great observation, which is followers of Jesus should actually develop experience in ways that actually benefit people. Does that make sense? There are certainly spiritual connections that we should cultivate. There's character that we should cultivate. There's sensitivity to the spirit and all those things, but also flat out doing things well with excellence, with experience, right? With that people can count on us. That's a deeply important component here. A Christian pilot needs to be a very good pilot. A Christian surgeon needs to be a very good surgeon. Fill in the blank, right? Whatever you do in your life and I do with my life, we need to do it extremely well. And we need to develop experience and education that we can be counted on to do things with quality, with people can count on us, right? And I think there's a real pastoral lesson here again in Paul's travels and he could have just, I guess, taken a nap for 3,500 miles or whatever, but he clearly was curious by nature. He was learning things. He was building capabilities, and that really pays off here. Right, Randy? I mean, this pays off. And I think that needs to be I think that should always be part of our thinking about discipleship and growing, that we need to do things exceptionally well. The Christian reputation should not be we do things shoddily or we can't really be counted on. Right? And I think that's very much part of what the biblical record demands of us.
I'm was thinking about all the classic painters depicting Paul as sort of an old feeble man,
Yeah.
beaten down
Yeah.
by his various imprisonments. And here I envision strong, commanding presence,
Hmm.
you know, and much younger
Yeah.
than what
Yeah.
portrayed in
Um,
paintings.
maybe we need some new artwork.
I think we do.
Yeah.
I mean, wasn't Jesus, or wasn't Paul like maybe 5 years older than Jesus?
He would have been contemporary with Jesus,
Yeah.
so Paul would have been fifties. Now, in the ancient world, fifties, well, you were lucky if you made it to your fifties. So it, there's one interesting lecture I've seen in the past, Jesus dies at 33. And is really at that point old for what you could expect in some respects. But I like this description though. Paul is hardly this sort of depleted soul. I mean, there's a certain, which I think spills out in the "I told you so" speech that he makes, right? This is somebody who has a lot of healthy confidence.
I think what you've highlighted there in the second and third one are very practical. He
Are
said,
you jumping down here?
I'm jumping
No,
because.
let's finish this.
Oh,
And
okay,
you lead us to the second. Is there anything else we need to squeeze out of the take courage speech? And then we will jump. Maybe it's time to jump. Anything else? Yes.
I don't know, I got stuck on verse 9, and so how they mentioned the Day of Atonement. And so like that is the day that God
Yes.
Rosh Hashanah is when God says, this is your fate for the year, but on the Day of Atonement on Yom Kippur, that's the day that it's set. Like the
Yes.
seal is set. And so he's saying, hey, I see our journey. It's not gonna be great. Like there's gonna be a lot of loss. And so like his courage for everybody is saying like, this is already set in stone. This is it. This is what we've got.
Yeah,
And so then let's make the best of it. Let's
yeah,
stay together.
yeah. I like the word there. No, that's a good call. I noticed that too. That's really good. That's a good call. Anything else on that section of keeping courage, confidence? Good. We can always circle back. So Deanne's pushed us forward. What about the staying together speech? That's a
it's,
great speech.
I love it because it's saying, it's not every man for himself
Yeah.
here. It's not.
Yeah,
And it's a kind of, we need to work together on this. And, besides the courage piece that, yeah, we're gonna make it,
Yeah.
but we're not gonna make it every man for ourselves. We're gonna make it together.
yeah. Why is this speech important? Here, I mean, just even in the context, why is this speech important?
There were those who were saying, we're getting out of here because we're gonna take that boat, leave you guys to yourself.
Yeah.
We've seen that kind of in some recent incidences on ships and it doesn't work very
Yeah.
well, but we've seen it do well too.
So the crew would have motivation to bolt,
Yeah.
right? The prisoners definitely would have a motivation to bolt.
Ties into Jesus' message of taking care of our brothers and our sisters.
Yeah. Yeah, that's part of Paul's leadership, to go back to that word we started with here, is very rich in sort of protective hospitality for all. Isn't that interesting? In the ancient world, if one person survived a shipwreck, it was deemed to be a supernatural act. One person. And here, what does Luke say? 276 people, everybody is, this is a remarkable, right? That everyone's saved. So this business of taking care of everyone on the ship is a very strong hospitality that Paul has here. Yeah. Yes? Is that reluctance on your part?
Well, I'm just saying that's the message to this room. Is that even though Adventism has left us, we might do better by staying together anyway.
Staying together has real import, doesn't it? It's certainly a value that Jesus teaches with regularity. Holding cobbling groups together that often have very little in common. And why that, and what, Jack, and why that matters. And this vote just illustrates, when you look at the passages again, everything from soldiers that have their interests, prisoners have their interests, the captain of the ship interests, and then Paul and his companions all have these other, but Paul's sense of caring for that whole ship as his local parish, if you will, in the moment. It's remarkable, right? It's, I also think it speaks a word of caution to us about the theologies we sometimes create around, trying to think of an example, like, I remember reading years ago, about a plane crash. This was many years ago, there was a plane crash. It was like on a Saturday morning, and there was a testimony written up because there was an Adventist who decided not to travel on that day, and God preserved them because they had gone, after. That's really problematic for us. And what it says about God, right? Really problematic, and it sort of violates this premise of, caring, not only caring for your own, but for the whole, not only praying for your own, but praying for the whole. And this gets really tricky in times of war, because do I pray for the relief of suffering on one side or both?
But for the great controversy, you can't save everything. You can't have a miracle for everything. I mean, I have CP. There must be a reason for me to have CP, and I can go on.
Yeah. But the pastoral impulse here to me is really strong in Paul. And you see this, he articulates this in many of his letters, right? Where there's this, as bombastic as he is, he also has this very hospitable quality that he's learned from Jesus. Rachel?
And his confidence in God and confidence in the Lord is
Yeah.
contagious.
Yes.
He stands so strongly, he's not showing fear.
Yeah.
He's encouraging and telling them what to do, or offers advice. They choose not to, but he doesn't go crazy about it or frantic about it. He's an even force.
Yeah.
Showing gratitude and thankfulness.
Yeah.
To the Lord, which sometimes in the middle of storms, it's hard to be grateful.
Yeah.
And I think the people around him could see that he was very settled in his
Yeah. Those are
relationship.
good. Those are good words. Confidence, settled. And what I like, Rachel, about it is there's strong confidence in God is very settled, but it's not cheaply placed on either the way things are going to turn out in terms of circumstance, or sort of the thin veneer of like prosperity gospel, or everything's going to be okay. He may signal that, but the confidence is much deeper than the circumstances.
He cared for them. He said, go ahead, please eat.
Yeah.
Because you need to eat, you need to preserve your strength. You might die because you're not eating.
Yeah.
I mean, it was pretty cool.
One of the best lectures I've ever heard in my life, sermon lectures, was a reflection on the Jesus sleeping in the boat. And you remember, and the disciples are panicking, and Jesus says, they wake Jesus up, and Jesus seems annoyed a little bit and says, why do you have no faith? And the sermon was basically arguing, well, what were they supposed to do, and what was really going on here? And is it that you should have just realized that God would have pulled it out in the end? Come on, I would have woken up in time, basically, it would all have been fine. But the sermon went a different place and said that the real faith was, even if all things went down, there's faith. Even if the ship had gone down.
And that's true, because in the chapter before, he talks about the resurrection.
Because that's really where this settled confidence for those of us that are Christian comes from. It's not about confidence that the boat won't go down. It's that even if the boat goes down for us, resurrection. Right? Interesting. And so even though Paul's making some predictions that everything will be out, that's not the depth of the foundation of his confidence. It's much deeper than that. Much deeper than that. I think that's important because sometimes when we articulate confidence in God, I mean, we all hear this, right? It's more like, you know, God's gonna sort everything out. And we give circumstances, Mike, right? We give circumstances of, well, that may not be quite right. You know, we may be presuming certain things about what God's, I mean, the confidence has to be that no matter what the circumstances play out. It's really good.
Something Jack said, it spurred some thinking that I'm a little troubled by. A number of years ago, 4 people and myself, we rode our bikes about 2,000 miles, and it became clear very quickly that we weren't all the same strength. But if we all wanted to get there the shortest amount of time, we needed to stay together. Because if the fast people left the slow people, then the slow people would go slower because of drafting, right? And so we go at a pace that everybody can go. And we all get there together sooner than we would have all gotten there individually. But I'm not sure what to do with this in this kind of context, because my faith won't save you. So in some way, it's very individual. It's an individual relationship with God and with Jesus that saves me. Your relationship won't save the rest of this room, no matter how good it is. And so I'm not sure how to sort that out when it's an individual thing, but we're told repeatedly in lots of different ways to stay together. And how do I interpret that in relation to my experience within the Adventist church? I don't know what to do with it.
I really love this, but I mean, one thing's for sure, Rod, is that this is a great principle for us in community, which can be very frustrating, by the way, is are we willing to move at a pace where we keep people together's best? You know, because the purist in this room, and I will raise my hand among those who think they're a purist and an idealist, you have to check that with keeping people together. Right? You check that by keeping, you know, so that'll preach that matter, that's good stuff, yeah.
But in a way, if I see you with faith, by beholding, I become changed. And it's an example. And in a way, it can be a catalyst for me to grow.
It's true, because by riding with faster riders, I become faster.
Yeah, true.
Tim, Rod's statement about my faith can't save you, got me thinking about the way things are reported from the ancient world, where it was a communal thing. If the patriarch chose to follow the way of God, then the whole family was, or when Achan sinned, the whole family got stoned.
Yeah.
You know, and that concept bothers us in our society. What do we do with that?
Yeah.
Is there any truth in it?
I wanna come back and respond to that at the end.
So there are nuances here, and maybe this is not applicable, but I'm looking at Paul. You know, he set out on his missionary journey at first to evangelize, and then he was gonna go again. But the relationship with the person that he went with, yeah, they had different ideas about where to go and what to do. So they separated. He chose someone else. So it wasn't, well, we're gonna stick together no matter what, even though we don't agree about some things here. It was kind of divide and conquer, kind of a thing. So, you know, maybe that's not applicable here, but there is a sense that we might not always agree on everything, maybe, you know, moving as a unit or whatever, but there is some leeway here to say, well, sometimes it's good to split up and, you know, work.
Yeah, that's right. Good.
I have layers of questions here, and I wish I had solutions. I don't know that I do. But some of the questions that come up, the thief on the cross, he clearly didn't have a experiential, lifelong relationship growing with Christ, but he saw by example a image of a world that there's something different about this man and I want to be a part of it, and that was changing for him. And I think we could look at that in the same way of the environment of when we have others around us, that it's possible that our relationship can be the impetus for change in others. So that's one thought I have. Another question, because we're going through this, that came up in my mind, is kind of relates to a book, and I think the title of it, Why Does God Let Bad Things Happen to Good People? That always, a lot of people kind of get that spark, and there's a much bigger discussion to be had with that. I think you could have an entire Sabbath school session discussing that, but part of that, to me, the brief answer I come up with is that it's not God and not letting, it's more that we live in this terrible place, and the consequences of the environment and the choices that we make result in bad things happening around us in the world. But that's not, I don't know, it's
You've raised two huge issues in
Too
one,
big.
you were right.
two big questions, and that's, so
I'll take up the first and then I'll tie to Tim your comment. I'll take up the first one a little bit, which is, I think that the underlying uncertainty that seems to lurk again and again in Christianity and in Adventist Christianity around, am I saved or not, is really problematic. Because it creates in us a constant anxiety of not knowing exactly how salvation works. Have I been meaningful enough? Is my intention good enough? Have I lived up to what I was supposed? And it just plagues to the point where I think it really erodes the possibility of rich relationship with God. Does that make? And if anything, in the gospel, there is this overwhelming sense that we can have confidence in the faith of Jesus, by the way. Not in our own faith, Rod, but in the faith of Jesus, right? And I think to the degree to which that we rest in confidence in salvation, it's critical. Because I think this underlying thing lurks a lot, and I've seen this in church life forever, and there's just this soundtrack of uncertainty that sits there, and then it creates in us just a lot of anxiety that ends up being, really rough. For example, to go to the thief of the cross or the communal, do you trust that God can sort that out perfectly well or not? A couple billion people that are currently sucking oxygen on this planet, a couple billion at least, will never have access to anything we're talking about today in their entire life. Are we clear about this? Will not. So for me, understanding the God that Jesus reveals eases my uncertainty about how God loves all of us. Does that mean, are you with it? Does this make sense? This underlying uncertainty plagues us, and we could spend a year just sorting through salvation theologies and how that and the damage it causes when we sort of don't have full confidence in what Jesus has done for us.
And here we are in Acts, the message is quite clear. It's not just for the Jews, it's for everyone. And this message in God is for everyone, and so salvation is for everyone, whether the message might receive them or not. He wants us all to be there.
I have never run into a single person who was bathing in the riches of God's grace that was then just thinking it freed them up to just be horrible. I hear this, if you focus too much on grace, man, then people are not gonna be serious about works. I've never met a single person who was really serious about the richness of God's grace in their life that was using it as a license just to be horrific. We act like those are in opposition, but as a pastor, I've never found that to be the case. I find people that are richly, recognize their sin, recognize, the total need of God in their life, totally trusting. Those people tend to be naturally abundant in their fruit that they want to live in their life. Has been my experience.
I don't know that we understand how deeply the blessed assurance is.
Yes,
And how, what a gift that is just unbelievably wonderful.
yes. If it's a gift with lots of caveats and footnotes and maybe nots, friends, it doesn't feel very much like the richness of the gift, does it, Lois?
I just love this vision that he tells. When it ends with this word, God graciously has granted you the safety of all who are sailing with you. And
That's a good phrase.
can we not change our attitude towards, we're going to be gracious and we care about the safety of everyone who's sailing with us.
Yeah.
We sail from our mother's womb towards a cemetery. We're all sailing. And the concern of God is everyone who's sailing with you. And if we could, focus not on, well, Paul says, well, I serve God and I belong to him. Okay, that's fine. We should do that between us and God.
Yeah.
But our concern is not, am I okay with God? That my concern is, can we all be safe? Can we all have a nice trip? Can we all get where we'd like to go?
I love these stories. Jack, that's beautiful. I hope you don't forget the first phrase you used, because I want to remember that. The safety of all. I was reminded too, that I was thinking about this morning, about these stories, and some of you historians in the room can remind me of others, but I thought of two. One is the story, was it the Danes that rescued so many Jews during yes, with the great flotilla of,
Yep.
right?
Private
The
little
great
craft.
private flotilla. I mean, a remarkable story of and also the escape off of, remind me, the British troops that were trapped, at Dunkirk as well. And these, if you could think of other stories, but I thought about some of these, Dunkirk was also private ships, right?
Yes.
And these stories of everybody saying, on my boat, I'm gonna do everything I can, right? And we look at those stories, and so you think about, well, what boat? I think this is where the preaching moment comes, but what about your boat? You all have a boat. Every one of us has one. May not be the boat that you want, the yacht that you want, but you have a boat. I have a boat. What am I doing with it? In the spirit of Dunkirk, in the spirit of those Danes? How am I using the boat of my life? And then that's where it gets magical, because then we are a flotilla as a church, right? We each are contributing to this life of pulling people to safety and to salvation and to goodness and to joy. I just love this imagery.
You kind of hit on it a little bit when you were talking about all the billions of people in the world, when you were saying that. And in my travels, and I think of like the Indonesian people, Balinese people, beautiful, beautiful people that are kind, are loving, and they worship somebody very different than I do. And it's hard because you're saying the boats that we're in, and I don't necessarily, it's an interesting parallel in a way, because it's like, we're similar people in the kindness and the love and the fruits of our labors and how we act. And yet the way we've grown up is very different. And in some ways, I can say maybe they are serving, whether it's Hindu or Muslim or whatever it is, they're serving with their hearts and with the same intentions as I am. And yet I just sometimes feel like sometimes in my American eyes looking at it, my boat, sometimes I think that's part of the problem, is that sometimes my boat, I think I might be on a different mission, but in actuality, the core, and that's why I actually go back, which is different than what Jack was saying. I have that blessed assurance of I am God's and I am serving, and I want to serve, and I want to be open and willing to change myself and the course. And that's the beauty of going to different cultures, and seeing other beautiful people.
Well, extremely well said. Absolutely.
It seems to me that most of us are in the boat we're in because we were born in that boat.
Yeah.
We didn't choose, we didn't go boat shopping.
And if we have to take that into consideration.
Yeah. I love that. So a little bit of theology in Shoshana. So what does monotheism mean? Let's start with that. I'm asking you a very straightforward question. What does monotheism mean?
One God.
Yeah, so there's one God. This is a very Jewish, Old Testament, bleeding over into, the teaching, monotheism, one God, right? So what is Baal?
Another God.
No, wait a minute. No.
No,
You just said there was one God.
yeah, I mean, it's.
So is Baal a God? Be very careful how you answer this question.
An idol.
What is an idol? Hannah, come on.
Man-made.
What is an idol?
Image of a God.
Yeah,
The God other people believe in, not you.
It's an image of God. Can we ride with that? It's an image of God. It's not a God, it's an image of God.
But there
Because
were many.
you just all shook your head, nodded your head, you said there's only one God. Unless you wanna say there's more than one God, then we can take that up. But it's not even a false, it's an image of God that is false.
The people of the
Are you
time
with
thought it
me?
was a God.
It is a false image of God, right?
But in the Old Testament, there were gods. They said, you worship gods, there are
Yeah.
gods, but this is the one. I mean, that's what it kept.
But monotheism by definition means there is only one God, not one true God, one God who is true. Are you tracking with me?
Yes.
This is a very important distinction, friends. And Deanne, I understand there might have been different understandings along the way, is that what I'm saying is monotheism, which we hold as the principle, I will argue, as the principal theology of our entire church is that there's one God. So let's just start with that. So Baal, Hannah, these are false images of God. And I want to remind you, please remind me, the first three of the 10 Commandments are what?
God.
Help me, please. What's the first one?
Worship no other God but worship.
No other God. What's the next one?
Before.
Do not take my name in vain.
No images.
No bad ideas about God. Name in vain, right? No bad ideas about God. And what's the last one?
Worship.
No images of God. What is the issue that 30% of the 10 Commandments, the first three, are taking up here? Is it that there are other gods? No, class, we're gonna be very clear about this. You said there's only one God.
But the people of the time had issues.
That's true, but what I'm saying is no other God, no bad ideas about God, which is taking God's name in vain. By the way, it's not swearing. Are we clear about that? That's not really what it's talking about. I'm not in favor of swearing, but that's not what it's talking about.
Those three have to do with misrepresentations.
They all have to do with misrepresentations of God. And this is the problem of images, is should we take all the Jesus felts away from the kids? That's not really what the issue is. Are you with me? I mean, we may not like the lily white Northern European Jesus. That's a problem. There's other problems with the way we portray Jesus as a Norwegian. Where he was that's not who he was. But no images, no bad ideas, and no other gods. But it really has to do with these bad ideas of who God is. Richie?
So the first commandment doesn't say there are no other gods, it says have no other gods before me.
Yeah. Yes. It's tricky.
There are other texts.
Yeah, it's tricky. But what I'm trying to drive out, James, just a second, what I'm trying to drive out here is if you start with the core, I think we could all agree that Christian theology, Richie, even if we don't go back, Christian theology and Adventist Christian theology is monotheistic. If there's anything, it's monotheistic. If that's the case, then the problem that we're trying to deal with. Sean, I'm gonna go to your, the challenge is we're trying to sharpen up the picture of God where it has been bad. Does that make sense? So what does that mean of, you took us to where? Did we go to Bali?
We went to Bali.
We went to Bali, all these wonderful places. We went to Bali. We went to, I think, Indonesia
Let's go.
in your conversation, Indonesia, etc. What this does, and I think this is where I think your comment, what this does is this allows us to say of those people, they are in pursuit of, because of the way they're wired, the one true God. But maybe some of the ideas and the perspectives of God are awry in some way, including in our own lives. And by the way, we talked about this last week, because what did Paul do in Athens, Rod? He went out and looked at an idol. Do you remember the story? I want to remind us of the story. And what was the name of the idol?
Unknown God.
The unknown God. That's an idol. And does Paul say, that idol of yours is completely wrong, you need to, what does he say about it? I'm going to enlighten you more about this idol that you're worshiping, this image of God that you have. That's different than just wiping it all out. And I think, Shoshana, what that allows for us, and if Paul Dibdall were here, he could do a much better job than I am missiologically in thinking about this, but it allows us to enter into cultures. And again, Dr. Dibdall's brilliant work on this. Hindu cultures, Muslim cultures, etc. It allows you to engage human beings as folks that are on the hunt just like we are for the one only true God, and at the same time to talk about deficiencies in views of God and approaches to God. Does that make sense? And I think missiologically it really opens up possibilities. And hear me clearly, it's not saying that everybody just has the same good old, everybody's image of God is the same. That's not what I'm, but it is saying that the core spiritual impulse that God puts us inside of that, which by the way is in Ecclesiastes, right? God has put this in our hearts and allows that to be something around James and then Lynn, I think.
Well, I was thinking about this from the beginning, but it didn't just hit me how I wanted to say it until Richie said something. When you say you're a monotheist, person A can believe in God A that they see an image of, and person B can believe in God B that they see an image of. They can both completely consider themselves monotheists because they don't believe in 1,000 gods like some of the Indian religions. They still consider themselves monotheistic. I'm, like you said, Dr. Dibdall is very good about that. I know a little bit about Buddhism since I lived there so long. They, I think, would consider their stream of religion as monotheistic, even though there's not a specific God figure. There's Buddha and the leader. And again, from our perspective, that is a skewed perception of God. And one of the things that some of our pastor friends did over there, because Thailand is very, very into spiritualism, we sometimes get a little niche in, oh, you were scared, you saw a ghost? You know what? I actually know of some people who know of the great spirit, the spirit that's over all the other spirits.
Yeah.
And that's another niche.
Which has been a part of Christian missionary work for generations, that kind of framing. Oh, Randy and Glenn, yeah. Glenn and then Randy, yeah.
As I look at it, the Bible is full of examples of trying to reach people with where they're at in order to allow for an open dialogue about communicating the truth about who God and Jesus is. And so the example of the unknown God, that's the unknown God idol, that's one example. Another was just, we went over the chapter last week where Paul said, hey, let me tell you about ways that were similar. And so trying to draw people into the conversation.
Very much so.
And I would say that that's really the case throughout the Bible, where even I would look at the 10 Commandments, he was dealing with a group of completely unruly, so far out there group of people that had idols, that or murdering, or lying. They needed a basic construct of here's the simplest things that you could do to try to find happiness on this planet. This is how you should behave.
Yeah.
And so I think, but at the end of it, it is if we can at least start there, then we can start talking and I can start teaching you about, well, who is God? Who is Jesus? And who is this relationship?
Right.
And that's- so
It
it's about
opens up I love that. Randy?
And again, this is one of my favorite words, semantics. And having the different religions that all, like the ones that we're talking about, Bali in Indonesia, that's all they've known, and they're worshiping the God that they know, and it's a progress and it's a progression, just like us. We don't have 100% of the truth.
Yeah.
Some people think we might, but we don't. And if we are stagnant and don't grow, so in a way, all the different religions in general that are somewhat monotheism are all worshiping the one God.
Yeah.
But it's just semantics. I say it this way, you say it that way, and
No, I think that's that's true. I think that's true. Maybe we can finish, I see we're out of time. Maybe we can just finish with this idea here since we had it here. Hebrews, Jesus is the radiance of the glory of God. This is Hebrews 1:3. Jesus is the radiance of the glory of God and the exact imprint of his nature. Okay? You know what the word is for the imprint? I wrote it up here. In Greek, it's eidolon. And what's interesting there is what the Bible writers are saying is there's only one true idol of God. There's one true eidolon, and it's Jesus. And that's why we say that Jesus is the highest form of the revelation of God there is, the perfect representation. Colossians does the same thing, by the way. He's the exact representation of God. And that's where, as Christians, we say Jesus reveals God perfectly, even if our eyesight is imperfect. And I think Randy's point is right. My youngest wants us to get a higher resolution television. And I tell him it's not gonna do me any good. You can get that thing as clear as you can. I got issues here, right? And I think theologically it's the same way, right? Jesus is perfect high definition television. But I still, even then, I'm going to have limited because of my own issues, right?
I mean,
Because this is what happens, but one more thought.
even in this room, if we were to have everyone define how they believe in God, what God means to them, we're gonna have as many people in this room, different pictures.
Yeah, there'll be different languages, but why I think this is so important, again, because we kind of launched this from the hospitality of Paul, is that, and Shoshana, your point is, it allows us to be very, if you will, orthodox. There is one God, period. That is what Jesus taught, that's what the scriptures teach. But it does recognize that the way that people are growing and understanding that God are in a lot of different places. That doesn't mean everybody's got the same quality of picture, so don't mishear me. This is why missionaries go do what they do, because to introduce Jesus is to introduce the ultimate revelation of God.
Better idol.
Yes, it's fantastic, right? I mean, that's the motivation, right? That's the core motivation. And so there's one God, there's different qualities of the practice of religion, they're different, and Jesus is the standard that really opens things up. And I think that this is what gives us a whole new way of approaching one another, because we don't have to say you're completely wrong, but let me tell you more, right? Let me help you see it. Let me help you see it better. And we didn't get to this. We need to pray and go.